dear viewers, it's time to talk about how conception itself occurs in more details. I'm sure that most of you have very little knowledge on this subject. If you are planning a pregnancy or you are unable to conceive, I think this information will be very helpful to you. So watch this video. I'm Dr. Olena Berezovska and I welcome you to my YouTube channel. So the conception of a child does not occur in the uterus but in the fallopian tube, its widest part, which is called the ampulla. This is where the sperm meet the egg. Therefore, without exception, all pregnancies are tubal pregnancies at the very beginning. To conceive a child, one spermatozoid is not enough. Also, usually only one spermatozoid penetrates the egg. The shell of the egg is quite thick. For spermatozoa to penetrate there, a huge number of other male germ cells attack the egg. With their death and destruction, enzymes and other substances are released, which make the shell weaker. Thus, millions of spermatozoa pave the way for the lucky one. We do not know how nature determines the quality of the best spermatozoid that is destined to be a fertilizer. This is a secret of the nature, which thousands of scientists have been trying to solve for more than a decade. In other words, conception is not just the fusion of two sex cells. This is the entry of a small sperm into a large egg. Then the first division of the fertilized egg occurs, usually within the first 30 hours. It must be symmetrical with mathematical precision. If symmetry is broken because of division, such a conception will end in nothing. Incorrect division of such an egg will lead to a poor quality embryo, which will end in a biochemical pregnancy or miscarriage. During the first 4 days, the fertilized egg moves through the fallopian tube into the uterine cavity. What makes the egg move? First, there are muscle contraction of the fallopian tubes, reminiscent of intestinal motility. If the fallopian tubes are healthy, then such a movement goes on without a delay. If there is damage to the fallopian tube, then this can lead to an ectopic pregnancy. But also embryo's quality plays an important role in its movement. If the fertilized egg is defective, it may get stuck in the fallopian tube. In 60% of ectopic pregnancies, the cause lies in a defective egg. Cells that arise in the first days of the division of a fertilized egg are called blastomeres. An embryo itself is called a zygote. Also, there is no embryo as such yet. We use the word embryo most often despite the different names because it's in general terms understood by most people. Even in IVF, when we talk about embryo transfer, there are not embryo per se, but conditionally we call this state of the gestational egg embryos. When 60 cells appear after division, such a fertilized egg begins to increase in size. Before it was divided but did not grow. From this point on, cell differentiation begins. What does it mean? For the whole organism of a child to appear from two cells, it is necessary that subsequent groups of cells begin to perform a certain function and different organs can be formed from them. Cell differentiation is the performance of a different task by individual cells. For example, think about the task of employees in the business you work for. Each employee may have different responsibilities and tasks. You can be the boss, accountant, marketer, advertiser, etc. at the same time if it's a big organization. Some cells of the fertilized egg will be used in the construction of the placenta and fetal membranes, other in the creation of the embryo and its organs. For example, if you have heard of an empty gestational egg, this means that the embryo, the future fetus, is missing. This happens just because of violation of the cell differentiation. The fetal egg enters the uterine cavity in the state of a 16-cell organism. We call the state morula, and in this state implantation begins. Interestingly, morula is not attached for 2 days, but negotiations are underway with the mother's body, particularly with the endometrium. To be or not to be? Will you accept me or not? And not always the answer of the mother is favorable. On the contrary, during the first and even the second pregnancy, the response can be aggressive. Therefore, about 50% of the first pregnancies are interrupted, and not because there are problems with the embryo, but because the response of the female body is extremely negative. So the process of cell division continues, and a cavity appears inside the morula. This cavity is filled with a fluid, and morula resembles a bubble. From this point on, the embryo is called a blastocyst. It has primitive chorionic villi from which the trophoblast and the future placenta are formed. This villi begins to produce a hormone, human chorionic gonadotropin. It is a hormone of pregnancy, in particular its beta unit. When HCG appears in the blood, we can determine its level and talk about implantation and pregnancy. As soon as the chorionic villi begin to penetrate the endometrium, we can talk about implantation. Implantation has several stages. It is important to understand that the contact of the embryo with the uterine wall is a real physical contact. But what happens to the endometrium of the uterus while the embryo moves through the fallopian tube? What is an implantation window? The endometrium goes through different stages of growth and maturation. If you know at least a little about the menstrual cycles, then you will remember that there are two phases of the cycle. The first phase is called the estrogenic one, when the level of estrogen rises due to the growth of the follicle. This phase is also called the proliferative phase. The word proliferation means growth, and this term refers to the growth of the endometrium. The second phase is called the progesterone phase because the corpus luteum of the ovary produces progesterone. In relation to the endometrium, this phase is called the secretory phase because the endometrium stops growing and begins to transform into glands. Endometrial glands contain a fluid we call secretion. There is no abrupt transition from one phase to another. Also, ovulation is the moment when we talk about change in phases. The thickness of the endometrium can only be accurately determined at the time of ovulation. It is 5-8 millimeters. Implantation cannot occur when the endometrium is in a state of growth. That's in a proliferative phase. For the endometrium to be suitable for implantation, it must become secretory, and ovulation is a signal for the restructuring of the endometrium. Stop growing, becoming productive. The endometrium belongs to a glandular epithelium, therefore it can produce and accumulate certain substances that are important not only for implantation but also for the embryo. The word secretory can be compared with the word juicy. Also, every month, as progesterone level rises, a process called decellulization occurs. Endometrial decellulization has been observed in only a few mammalian species. This process is reversible. Therefore, in the absence of conception and pregnancy, the uterus must get rid of this altered endometrium. That is why menstruation occurs. Decidual tissue plays an important role in protecting the walls of the uterus from overly aggressive chorionic invasion. Imagine how fast the embryo grows, so that within 9 months a whole organism grows from 2 cells into billions of cells. Therefore, the embryo is very aggressive and tries to attach, in fact invades the endometrium quickly and firmly. If there were no decidual tissue, the placenta would grow deep into the wall of the uterus. Unfortunately, such cases of placenta ingrown exist, but not often. Sometimes because of this, it is necessary to remove the uterus. In other words, endometrial decellulization is a special kind of protection for a woman. In the second phase of the menstrual cycle, the corpus luteum appears and it begins to produce progesterone. Progesterone is often referred to as the hormone of pregnancy. Also, during pregnancy, the placenta produces progesterone and not the corpus luteum. The peak level of progesterone is observed on the 7 days after ovulation. When doctors send women to determine the progesterone levels without considering the length of the cycles and ovulatory period, this is often a mistake. You can get false results. Why is the increase in progesterone after ovulation is so important? As the fertilized and dividing egg travels down the fallopian tube, rising progesterone levels act on the endometrium and prepare it for implantation. Implantation begins in 6-7 days after ovulation. By this time, the implantation window occurs and the endometrium is ready to receive the embryo. Progesterone also acts on the muscular wall of the uterus and relaxes it during embryo attachment. As soon as the contact of the embryo with the endometrium has taken place and implantation has begun, many substances from the mother's body can enter the embryo. This is important to remember, as some substances can damage the embryo and lead to malformations or its demise. Implantation depends not only on a healthy embryo but also on the ability of the endometrium to cooperate with the embryo. Therefore, during the window of implantation in the endometrium, special structures arise like tentacles, which we call pinopods. Pinopods surround the embryo, reducing the distance between it and the uterine wall. Implantation has several stages. The first stage is attachment, or rather gluing or adhesion of the embryo to the endometrium. The second stage is the drilling or penetration of the endometrium. During this period, endometrial vessels can be damaged and implantation bleeding may occur. The third stage is invasion of the embryo, its chorionic villi into the wall of the uterus, forming contact with the maternal vessels in order to receive nutrients and oxygen from the mother. These stages of implantation take place in the first 7 days and they play an important role in the progress of pregnancy. Also, in general, the implantation lasts 2 weeks and then the placenta is formed. Violation of implantation in the first 7 days, this is the third week of pregnancy, we call biochemical pregnancy. Drilling occurs in 9-11 days and invasion is observed in 12-15 days after conception. So during this period, false periods can occur. Also, this is not menstruation. The placenta is formed by 20 weeks of gestation, so we can say that it grows and attachment takes place in the first half of the pregnancy. Implantation is often called the double paradox of nature. There are biological and immunological paradoxes. The biological paradox is that the child is a foreign body for the mother's body. Even if it contains half of the chromosomal and genetic information from its mother, it is still not a copy of her. The immunological paradox is that two opposite processes take place in the body of a pregnant woman. Her defenses must accept the child, so they must be suppressed. But their stimulation also occurs, and immunity changes its character from cellular to humoral. There is another feature of implantation. Implantation requires an inflammatory reaction of the endometrium. Destruction of tissue and vessels of the endometrium during implantation increases the level of inflammation, but it also leads to improved blood supply of the tissues. When you damage your skin, for example, swelling and redness appear at the site of injury. This is the inflammatory response. It is needed for healing and regeneration. In the endometrium, the level of various substances, including white blood cells, leukocytes, increases. It has been proven that if this inflammatory response is suppressed artificially, for example by taking anti-inflammatory drugs, it can impair implantation. Doctors do not recommend taking non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs in the second half of the menstrual cycle when planning pregnancy, as this can lead to impaired implantation as well as damage to the embryo. What determines the success of implantation? The answer to this question also concerns the effectiveness of IVF and not just natural conception. The success of implantation is determined by the quality of the embryo by almost 90%. Implantation is possible even in menopausal women with a little preparation of the endometrium. The uterus is a target organ that is sensitive to hormones that act on the endometrium. There are many cases of women carrying pregnancies in menopause, but this was because of the transfer of embryos obtained from young women. The quality of the endometrium is also important for implantation, but there are many speculative claims here. Since the quality of the embryos cannot be improved, the woman becomes a target for fraud and profit. She is constantly told that her endometrium needs to be treated by all sorts of drugs, supplements, and procedures. She can spend a lot of time treating the endometrium but never get the desired child. They especially speculate on the thickness of the endometrium. If you do not have precisely 10 millimeters of the endometrium, you cannot bear the child. It is not true. Implantation can be at 3-5 millimeters of the endometrium. It is important to understand that endometrial thickness is often measured incorrectly. In each cycle, the thickness of the endometrium can be different. This is a feature of the endometrium. The main thing is that its structure should correspond to the phase of the menstrual cycle. We call this morphological change. In addition to morphological changes, biochemical changes are important. The structure and content of the endometrium are two important criteria for implantation. We will continue the topic of pregnancy in my other videos. If you like this video, don't forget to press like and subscribe to my video channel. See you soon!